If you listen to the budget statement earlier this year, I indicated clearly that the economy of St. Lucia is on an upward trend, that we have bottomed out, because if you look at the extent of our negative growth, it fell sharply, which of course means that we have covered a lot of ground and that we are on an upward trajectory. The key factor responsible for the emerging growth in the region is actually tourism. Most countries are doing exceptionally well. Most governments do not have the capacity to invest heavily in public infrastructure because of issues of debt, issues of investment, so they've had to rely heavily on the tourism industry. And St. Lucia has performed exceedingly well. I have noticed a return to investment here in St. Lucia by the private sector. You may have noticed the Diana Center that is being constructed at the end of Bridge Street. In addition to this, the new supermarket owners of Super J are spending significant sums of money to renovate and refurbish the supermarkets they inherited, which really is a very good positive sign. Because, you know, the private sector will not invest into new infrastructure if they don't have confidence in the future. In addition to all of this, in the next couple of days, Courts will be touring in the Swordfish mega building up at Marisil. And we have noticed significant increase in public sector investment, not just new roads, but infrastructure. So all of that is a very positive sign. It's been painful for the country, because as I've said repeatedly before, there's been a contraction in employment. And the good thing is that the government programs have helped to stabilize the situation. It can't resolve the issue because we need new investment. But I think we are beginning to see the movement that we have been expecting in the last couple of years. I think St. Lucia has bottomed out. There's far greater fiscal discipline in the country. And of course, we have reduced the fiscal deficit significantly down to about 3.6, 3.7, although I expect that it will rise just a little bit this financial year because of the new investments. One important development, and I stress important because it really was historical, I think both the government and opposition has decided to move in the direction of an economic citizenship program. The opposition supported the legislation in Parliament, and I think it's a recognition by both sides that we have to search for new economic opportunities for this country, especially opportunities to bring in new investment. I expect that we will see more activity in the hotel sector. That too is a good sign. I think, as you can see when you travel around, there's a new hotel being constructed at Rodney Bay. Mind you, it's not a large hotel, but it's significant. Renovation is underway at Coconut Bay in Vieux-Fort, which is another very positive development. And of course, everyone is waiting for the commencement of the Sunwing Hotel up on the site of the former smuggler's property. So I think we are on the right track. We are beginning to see results. And I'm not surprised that overall you have seen a return to growth in Eastern Caribbean economies. Some countries underwent structural adjustment far earlier than we did. Antigua, of course, as you know, went to the IMF. St. Kitts went to the IMF. Dominica had gone to the IMF years ago. Grenada is now under an IMF program. We have been spared an IMF program. But those adjustments in those countries, the fiscal discipline imposed on these countries have, of course, allowed them to better manage their public finances. And they are emerging out of these programs with the IMF leaner and stronger. I've heard that argument, but I'm not totally persuaded. So much of your market depends on where you invest and where your key markets are located. I think it is likely that there will be an initial rush to Cuba from the United States. And here I'm not only speaking of the eastern seaboard, but other destinations in the US, on the western coast, for example, of the US. Because Cuba, for many Americans, is an oddity. There's a fascination about Cuba. And of course, there is the historical nostalgia as well. I mean, a lot of Americans who knew the Cuba of the 1950s are anxious to see how this country has fared over the years. So initially, you may see a fairly significant movement to Cuba. But I think that eventually that will settle. Meanwhile, St. Lucia has to concentrate on developing other markets. I mean, I have tremendous enthusiasm for the Canadian market. I think if we continue to work with Sunwing and Air Canada and other airlines in Canada, we can continue to attract even more Canadians. The Canadians, I think, know Cuba very well. Over the years, when the embargo was applied to Cuba, a lot of Canadians went across to Cuba. So they know that market very well, and there's nothing new for them, except, of course, if they want to experience the new liberties that are emerging in Cuba. So for us, we have to continue to concentrate on Cuba. We have to continue to concentrate on the UK. But there are two emerging markets that we have to look at, and that is, of course, Western Europe and Latin America. Latin Americans were always able to go to Cuba, so I don't think that for them Cuba is a novelty. And so I am not as preoccupied as other people over the impact of Cuba. I'll say one thing about the Cuban authorities. They're very anxious not to hurt the rest of the Caribbean. And I know that the Caribbean Hotel and Tourism Association is advocating a Caribbean basin type tourism program for the entire Caribbean, including Cuba. We will see where that goes. I mean, I haven't got into the nitty-gritty of it, the nuts and bolts of that proposal. So I think once St. Lucia maintains its unique identity in the marketplace, that we are able to allocate resources to marketing. We are doing some things right these days. That's why there has been this spectacular turnaround in our prospects, and we have to continue to do the right things. So I'm not as dismayed, I'm not as preoccupied, because what matters is that St. Lucia has to be marketed as a unique, as a special product, a country with a difference. And of course, as you know, our biggest asset has always been our people. They're very warm, very generous, very open. And as the weeks and months go by and we face the marketplace, we have to maintain the quintessential quality of the St. Lucian product. The question of the future of Hernan Francois is determined by the Public Service Commission of this country. It's not determined by the Prime Minister of this country or the Minister of the Public Service. And so I would assume that the matter of his future is to be determined by the Public Service Commission, and that's where the authority really lies. Mr. Hernan Francois is currently on leave because, as you know, he was entitled to several days leave. There are a lot of police officers who have a number of days of leave. That has been the result of a number of things, including, of course, the pressures that the police have had to bear in the last couple of years because of the situation in crime, but also is due to very poor management of leave requirements over the last couple of years. So you have police officers with 150 days, 160 days, and we need to continue to work on that. But I'm sure the issues surrounding the future of Mr. Hernan Francois will be clarified once the Public Service Commission, of course, has had an opportunity to consider that matter. St. Lucia has been in the limelight for crime, in respect of crime, for years. Either because of the very high number of homicides in this country, because the number of homicides has been very disproportionate. And other countries have focused on that problem repeatedly. However, what the impact report seems to demonstrate is that a number of the killings that occurred in St. Lucia during the period of Operation Restore Confidence may well have been unlawful killings. And therefore, there has been tremendous pressure exerted by the United States of America to deal with those issues because they have cited those issues as human rights issues. And so, in this period, there's bound to be anxiety. Bound to be, because the report has been submitted to the Director of Public Prosecutions. It's not for the government to make a determination as to whether there is any evidence to prosecute any police officers. That's not for the government to do. It's for the Director of Public Prosecutions. So understandably, there's going to be some impatience on that matter until, of course, a determination is made by the Director of Public Prosecutions. The most that the government of St. Lucia could do is to facilitate the work of the Director of Public Prosecutions. And we have done so in two ways. First, is to recognize the independence of our office. Because the moment politicians begin to make judgments about who's guilty and not guilty, then of course we are breaching fundamental principles of law, and we are causing tremendous, tremendous damage. And that's one of the reasons why it has been wise for us to stay quiet on those issues, because anything you say in public in this period will be recorded and will be used. And I prefer this government to remain quiet until the Director of Public Prosecutions makes whatever decision that she has to make on these matters. The second thing that we have to do is to provide an environment for the Director of Public Prosecutions to do her job in accordance with the law. And it's no secret that the government of St. Lucia made available to the Office of the Director of Public Prosecutions two special prosecutors. Provision was made in the last budget. But again, it is not a matter for the government of St. Lucia to appoint public prosecutors. You know, one of the things that sometimes that is not easily understood is how these institutions work. The most that the government can do is to make the provisions available, make the resources available. But the question as to whether the DPP employs two additional public prosecutors is really for her and the Judicial and Legal Services Commission. And the person who chairs the Judicial Legal Services Commission is the Chief Justice. It's incredible that a lot of us don't even know how our Constitution works, and it's something, I guess, in the passage of time that we have to resolve. So there is bound to be some anxiety within the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. There are those in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force who believe that somehow the government of St. Lucia could tell the Americans what to do or just lift their Leahy law. The fact of the matter is that once the Americans, the State Department, imposed the Leahy law on St. Lucia, then it was accountable to the Congress of the United States. And it has to show the Congress of the United States that action has been taken by the government of St. Lucia to deal with those allegations. It is pointless for us to get involved in an argument as to whether the United States is being fair or unfair. That's not the issue. And I don't think that is a place that we have to go under these matters. We have to be concerned that if there were unlawful acts committed, that we ourselves have to address them. The unfortunate thing is that the impression is being given that we are under pressure to do so. That should not happen. In our own democracy, if unlawful acts have happened, we have to summon the courage to deal with the unlawful acts. So I understand full well the issues confronting the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. And the cold and harsh reality is that there are several officers in the Royal St. Lucia Police Force who I have heard whose visas have been cancelled to travel to the United States. Now, when that is going to happen and continue to happen, it means that our most powerful neighbor begins to have security problems with us right on their borders. So we have to deal with those issues. It's pointless to blame Kenny Anthony and say Kenny Anthony is a cause of the problem. The crude reality is that those problems occurred during the reign of the former government. I have a responsibility to pick it up and to deal with it. So, yes, there are persons in the police force who are anxious, who are nervous, who are worried, but we have to handle this issue, deal with this issue, and put it behind us. And the only way we can put it behind us is to confront it very directly. Because of our Constitution, because of our laws, we have to be patient in how we deal with it, because we have to go through certain processes at this time. So it is understandable if there is some anxiety, but I will say this about the Royal St. Lucia Police Force. While there are pockets of anxiety in the police force, it is also the case that they have been doing a remarkable job in all the circumstances. I mean, everyone was full of praise for them in the way they handled Carnival, a classic case in point. Until recently, the rate of murders seemed to be slowing somewhat. We had fewer murders compared to the same period last year and the previous year, which is a good sign. Of course, I don't have the up-to-date statement on the figures, because I know over the last 2 days or so there was an additional murder in the area of Mont Dudon. So I don't have those figures. But in all the circumstances, they are doing a very good job. There will always be wayward police officers, always be rogue police officers. They exist in every police force. But by and large, I would say that the majority of the police officers are doing the best in very difficult circumstances. They know that their reputation has been tarnished. They know that their reputation has been compromised. They know that they can't even attend regional seminars because the Americans might be funding those seminars, and there's a view of them in the region. The region looks at them with a certain amount of disdain because of what has happened. It's our job to clean it up. We have to clean it up as a government, they have to clean it up, and our community has to clean it up. We've got to put that past behind us, and that is why, for the future, we have to think of different methods of training our police officers. We had something unusual this year. I think we had a couple of weeks and months, there were no homicides, almost unheard of. All of a sudden that changed, then you had a spate of homicides. Now, I don't have up-to-date figures so that I can tell you today that as of today the figures are lower than last year. But the fact that there were windows when there were no homicides is an indication of what is possible. A lot of the work that the police is doing is really intelligence-driven now. The police have understood that they've got to garner evidence from the communities. They have to have a fair sense of what the criminals are up to and what the criminals are proposing, their plans to carry out illegal or unlawful acts and engage in criminal activity. The police have weapons that they're not using and they need to use. Often the problem too sometimes is that they don't know how to use the weapons. For example, there's the anti-gang legislation. It's at their disposal. The government has enacted the anti-gang legislation. And part of the problem now is how do you activate it and how do you make use of it. So I would say that the police are doing their very best in the current circumstances, that they understand that fighting crime has to be intelligence-driven, and that they rely heavily on the support of the community. The incidents of rape are deeply, deeply worrisome. And what catalyzes those incidents? It's a matter of speculation. Whenever crime occurs, people often talk about unemployment, etc., and almost justifying the criminal behavior of some persons. But with the incidents of rape, we have to go back to the drawing board to have a better and clearer understanding of this and to know where are your most vulnerable areas. But you know what? We have also got to reduce violence in our homes. There is too much violence taking place in our homes. Too much ill treatment of children, too much unlawful activity that people are afraid to report. When, for example, incest is going to take place in a home in St. Lucia, and parents of children, knowing that the incest take place, then proceed to defend the perpetrators of such activity, then we are setting up the case for even more rape cases in our midst. It also means that the police has to have a sharper sense of where young women are particularly vulnerable to rape, to incidents of rape. Because in some cases, there are serial rapists, as you know, individuals who attempt to rape more than one person. My own hope too is that the courts will not treat these incidents of rape with leniency. The courts must make a firm, strong, clear statement. The law empowers them to make strong, clear statements about persons who are convicted of rape. And the message must go out clear that this will not be tolerated in our society, that we have to treat our women with respect. And so I really do hope that while the police need to sharpen their focus, particularly in identifying potentially vulnerable areas, but we also will need the support of the community to identify those persons very early on who are capable of developing into rapists in their own right. That's one of the fundamental problems that I have. Too much wrongdoing is being allowed in our homes, in our communities. We are turning a blind eye and we're doing nothing about those things. There's no question about it. Never before have Caribbean countries seen so much inhumanity on their doorstep. I think one of the consequences of this will set back the relationship between the Dominican Republic and the Caribbean for years. Because there's no doubt in our minds that what is happening in the Dominican Republic is an affront to human rights, and it's inhumane. And several attempts to reason with the political directorate in the Dominican Republic has not borne fruit. In fact, at the meeting of ECLAC in Europe, it was agreed that there will be a joint mechanism created by CARICOM and the Dominican Republic with the support of the European Union. But that has not materialized. The Caribbean has had a hard time to convince even some countries in Europe and in Latin America that we are dealing fundamentally with a human rights issue. A lot of those victims in Haiti can't be blamed. It's not their fault. You happen to be born in a country. You're not the one who decides where you're going to be born. Your parents happen to be there in the circumstances of the period and you are born there, and then to have to go through that kind of discrimination, it can't be right. So in effect, this issue has set back relations between the Dominican Republic and the Caribbean for years. It has contaminated, muddied the waters. And the truth of it is that a lot of Caribbean countries are having great difficulty to sit in the same forum with the Dominican Republic. But you know what is amazing about this? It is the silence of countries in the hemisphere. The total and utter silence. You don't hear any voices of governments. It's like when it comes to issues of race, of our people, issues that affect our people in the region, we are alone. We have to deal with it. You're not hearing anybody else. But you see, on this issue, the Caribbean must remain firm. The Caribbean must remain focused and extend as much support as possible to the government and people of Haiti. We have fought discrimination too long. Too long. We have emerged out of it. We are children of slavery. That's where we came from. And we understand what is taking place in the Dominican Republic better than most. And it is for that reason that the countries of Latin America and North America need to understand our feelings on this matter.